Thank you, Moishe. Without further ado, I get to say that all the time. So this evening's topic is stigma, but when we talk about stigma in the workplace, we could be looking at it from one of two directions. We could either look at the stigma that the institutions, the occupations, the platforms that we might be considering are misconceived, and there are stigmas in our minds that we need to dispel, or we could be focusing on the stigmas that we may carry, either by virtue of being a minority, by being a woman, by being religious, by being ethical or non-ethical. And I think today we should be probably focusing on both because they really have reciprocity. And how people look at us and how we look at them and how we look at opportunities and how opportunities will treat us based on who we are really go hand in hand. So I'm going to talk for the next few minutes about being an Orthodox observant Jew in the workplace and what the challenges are, how people are looking at you, how looking at me, and how we need to be responsive to that and what we need to be anticipating. So let me first share with you a little bit of my background and experience. When I was in NYU Law School, the way it works in law school, for those of you who are not familiar, is that it's a 3-year program, and at the end of the first year, the beginning of the second year, you interview for a job for the second summer, which is between the second and final year of law school, and usually you get that job and you work in the law firm after you graduate. So that's really your career launching position. At the end of my first year of law school, I interviewed at 30 law firms, 29 wearing a yarmulke and 1 without. I got 1 offer to the firm without a yarmulke. The only reason I interviewed without a yarmulke is because the year before, one of my friends had interviewed with a yarmulke, was given an offer by that firm, but was told, you can't wear a yarmulke here. So I figured I'm not going to be able to wear a yarmulke anywhere. I might as well interview without a yarmulke. And I thought at the end, well, maybe I'm not a good interviewer. And maybe that's the problem. So at the end of the second summer, just on a lark, even though I was planning on going back to the firm I had interned at, I interviewed at 6 top law firms, each one without a yarmulke, and I got 6 offers. So it was clearly, in 1985, yarmulke was a big deal. And today, we'll talk in a couple of minutes about whether it's still a big deal. Because what I'd like to do is share with you my experiences, share with you how I see the professional world of business today, whether it's in law, whether it's in business, whether it's in finance or marketing. And then I would like to do 2 things after doing that. Number one is I would like to give you some bad news, and that is that certain stigmas, certain challenges have dissipated, and certain new ones have entered into the fray. And finally, I want to share with you a real big misconception that we have, which is what we're taught, and what I was taught, and I suspect you are, and I hope you are, that you could accomplish anything you want. You could do anything you want. The world is your oyster. But we're not told often enough, but there's a price we pay for the achievements that we're seeking to realize. So I left the law school. I had this position. I remember when I started out, there was another issue as being an observant Jew, and I had a dispute with my co-religious Jewish entries into the law firm. In those days, kosher food was not as ubiquitous as it is today. And the firm would have events without kosher food. And one of my colleagues used to go to the firm and bother them and say, it's not right. You make all kinds of accommodations for other minorities and other needs. You should have kosher food for us. And I disagreed. And I said, that's not really a good idea. It's not really fair because the harder you make it for the firm to accommodate us, the less likely they're going to be to hire Orthodox observant kosher people next year. Let's just let it go. And I lost that battle. He kept on, and the others joined him in complaining. And today, 40 years later, I'm not sure who was right. Maybe what he was doing was laying the foundation for the kosher accommodations, which today are fairly common. I remember about 6 months into my first year, a junior partner in the firm, who was not observant, but was very traditional Jew, came over to me on a Friday as I was leaving about 2 hours before sundown and said to me, I so admire your courage. Every Friday I see you leave early in the afternoon or late in the afternoon in the summer. And I'm also traditional. In our house, we also have a Shabbat evening meal together. We're not observant, but we have that. And every Friday I'm struggling. Should I go home? Should I not go home? And I see how courageous you are, that you do go home every Friday, no matter what, no matter what's going on in the office. And I said to him, courageous? I'm not courageous. If I don't show up before sundown, I lose my wife. So that's what courageous would be. And we have to create for ourselves an environment in which we have our values very clear and very straight. Because what I learned is that the most important characteristic of developing a tolerance for our observance is consistency. And if we cut corners in some areas of Jewish observance and then expect accommodations in others, we're going to lose our credibility, we're going to lose our integrity, and probably rightfully so. I remember I realized that I was accomplishing part of my goal in identifying who I was when my colleagues stopped saying off-color jokes when I was in the room and stopped using language that was inappropriate when I was in the room. And I never said a word about it, but it meant they began to realize the values that an Orthodox Jew brings to the table. And therefore, you're able to assess how you're doing in portraying yourself as an observant Jew. And as I mentioned, today it's very, very different. Today, kosher food is available in almost every major professional and business environment. In New York, we have restaurants, both kosher and non-kosher restaurants that will provide kosher food upon request. Shabbos is familiar to all of us, to all of the firms in business, investment banking, and marketing, and finance, and law. Everybody knows about Shabbos, and not only in New York. My son-in-law in Atlanta was just made partner in his law firm, wearing a yarmulke. Ropes and Gray, which is where I was working for many, many years, just retired from, just made 2 partners this December with yarmulkes in Boston. It's a different environment today. And you're fortunate to be graduating into that kind of world in which being an observant Jew is not viewed as a problem in terms of behavior, in terms of practice. But there's a bad news as well. And that is, even though the practical behavioral dimensions of orthodoxy are no longer an obstacle to your future, there's a new obstacle. And the obstacle is not how you behave, but how you think. Because the values of Torah and the values of Torah Judaism are very often anathema to the work environment. And it very, very often will be a situation where you cannot share what you think about a topic being spoken around a boardroom, and you cannot share your views on different issues. I'll give you an example of a type of topic that would be disastrous for me if in a boardroom if I would mention it. I was a corporate lawyer. If I would mention that under halacha, we're allowed to charge interest to a non-Jew, but not charge ribis, not charge interest to a Jew, they would look at me as archaic and immoral, perhaps. I can't share what I believe is appropriate based on my legal halachic criteria, and therefore we keep things to ourselves. And therefore the idea that today, in our open environment, our disparate views and ethics and values opens us up to the world without any restrictions is simply not true. There is restrictions that we have to impose on ourselves. We no longer have to change our behavior or be concerned about how our behavior is going to be viewed, but we need to be concerned about how our ideas are viewed and how much we want to be forthcoming in sharing those ideas. And that creates a tension for us. Because as we spend years and years in working environments with people who don't share our values or our aspirations or our goals in life, we are at risk of beginning to adopt more and more of the values and attitudes of those around us. And that's a challenge of being an Orthodox Jew in the business environment. To remind ourselves that even though we are colleagues, and even though we're part of the system, and even though we're being profitable and we're making money ourselves, there is a distinction, there is a division, because Torah values have to be the core of what we're about, even though we want to be ambitious. And even though we're going to enter into the workplace, regardless of the environment that it may be, it's available to us. We want to take advantage of it. We want to exploit it. We want to work fairly and honestly, but we also have to be on guard. And that's the final point that I want to share with you today. When we're told that the world is our oyster, that every opportunity is now available to us as a Jew and even an Orthodox Jew in today's American social and business society, we should not fool ourselves into believing and not accept if we are told that we could have it all, because we can't have it all. Every choice we make is a trade-off. The more ambitious you're going to be, the more you invest in your career, and I invested enormously. I spent 14-hour days for years on end in advancing my career, but there was a trade-off. I didn't learn as much Torah as my peers did. I didn't spend as much time with my children as I might have wanted to. I made calculations as to how to balance. But to say to yourself you could have it all is simply not a truism. It's a fake out. And we have to be honest with ourselves and analyze what our strengths and what our weaknesses are and assess how ambitious we want to be, not because we may not be able to achieve what we want to achieve. You can. We know in Torah Hashkaf and Torah philosophy, the strongest power in the world is Ratzon Hashem, the will of God. But the second strongest power in the world is Ratzon Adam, the power of the human being, and our desires and our aspirations. We have tremendous power, and we could achieve enormous things. But we need to be very careful about what we are pursuing, because whatever we pursue has a price to be paid. And therefore, there is a stigma. There is a stigma, but some of it may be false and some of it may be true. When you enter into the world outside of Yeshiva University, outside of the Orthodox community, there are endless opportunities. And you probably could achieve almost anything you want to. But you also have to be very, very mindful of what you are really willing to give up to achieve your goals. Many of them you could achieve and not give up everything, but you're going to be giving up some things. How much that is, that's going to be your challenge. And that's really the challenge of the Orthodox Jew. Making decisions, balancing your life, deciding not only what you want, but what does Hashem, what does God want you to be doing? So I give you a blessing that you should, number one, identify your challenges, and number two, make the decisions with responsibility. Thank you.